After Stephen Hawking's death, researchers uncovered a file buried deep in his private archives, one never meant for public eyes. It wasn't a formula or a theory. It was a first-hand account of something he experienced when his mind slipped beyond the edge of life. What you're about to hear blurs the line between science and soul, and it changes everything. You know his name. Stephen Hawking, the man in the wheelchair who cracked open the edges of the universe with his mind, who challenged black holes, rewrote time, and dared to ask, what happened before the Big Bang? But what most people don't realize is what happened after his final papers were filed, after the applause faded, after the voice synthesizer went silent. This is not about the Stephen Hawking you read about in school textbooks or saw giving TED Talks. This is about what came after. A hidden chapter no one expected, buried deep inside encrypted folders, uncovered only after his death in 2018 by a trusted assistant. Among decades of equations and unpublished manuscripts was a file, a strange one, not mathematical, not theoretical, but personal, philosophical, maybe even spiritual. It was labeled Perceptual Collapse and the Threshold of Mind. No one had seen it before. It wasn't logged in any official archive, it wasn't shared with collaborators, and it didn't behave like the rest of his files. It required a separate decryption key, hidden, deliberately. But why? Let's rewind. By the end of his life, Hawking had become a living paradox, a brilliant theoretical physicist who no longer had full control of his body, but whose consciousness remained razor-sharp. A man who, trapped inside, began to turn inward, not just toward particles and dimensions, but toward the very nature of mind itself. His body was failing, but his questions were getting bigger. What happens when perception breaks down? What is awareness beyond language? And, more chillingly, what remains of the self when the brain begins to let go? In the last 2 years of his life, Hawking revisited old territory, black holes, entropy, the arrow of time. But close friends said something had shifted. His tone grew more reflective, less combative, and behind the scenes, he was exploring what he once dismissed publicly: consciousness, death, and, possibly, something beyond both. His final lectures barely scratched the surface, but in quiet moments between public appearances, he began keeping notes. Not for publication, for himself. He was trying to describe something that didn't fit inside equations. According to colleagues, Hawking had begun recording altered states of mind, moments where he felt detached from the limits of time and space. Some believed it was the medication. Others whispered it was something more. One assistant described watching him enter what she called a deep silence, a state where he stared forward for long periods without moving, without blinking, then later dictated strange poetic descriptions about dimensional thinning, awareness unspooled, and sensation without locality. That language doesn't sound like the Hawking we know, but here's the twist. The encrypted file contained entries written in precisely that tone. And buried within those pages was a confession, not of belief, but of experience. He described what he called the perceptual collapse, a moment when, late one night, his conscious awareness detached from what he described as the illusion of mental locality. His body remained in the chair, but he was somewhere else. He used phrases like the self inverted. I watched from above my thoughts. There was no time, only awareness folding into itself. If this came from anyone else, you might write it off as poetic metaphor. But this came from the man who mapped the inside of a black hole using raw logic. A man who once said philosophy was dead, and now he was writing about crossing a threshold of mind. That's not just a change of opinion, that's a shift of worldview. Even stranger, he compared the experience to quantum superposition. Not metaphorically, but literally. He believed consciousness could enter a state similar to quantum overlap, existing both in and out of time, self and non-self, form and formlessness. It wasn't mystical for him, it was physics, applied to the mind. That's where it gets dangerous. Because when a mind like Hawking's starts blending quantum mechanics with the soul, institutions start to panic. You see, the document wasn't meant for publication, but it also wasn't meant to be destroyed. It was hidden, like a time bomb of thought, waiting to be found when the world was ready. And here we are. If what's in this file is true, then the line between science and spirit is thinner than we ever imagined. And that's just the beginning. Because the file doesn't end with a theory. It ends with something much more personal. A moment, a sensation, a vision, perhaps, of what lies just beyond the veil. But to understand that, we have to look deeper. Let's move into the first revelation, what Hawking experienced, when his mind began to slip free. There was a moment Stephen Hawking never spoke about publicly. A moment buried deep in his private notes, hidden beneath decades of groundbreaking equations and cosmic theories. A moment so profound it challenges everything we thought we knew about the mind, the body, and what lies beyond. It happened during a medical crisis late in his life. You have to imagine the scene. A fragile man, trapped in a body slowly betraying him, caught in the twilight between consciousness and unconsciousness. The line between life and death blurred. In that liminal space, Hawking described an experience unlike anything he'd ever imagined. He wrote of a time when his mind remained sharp, aware, active, but his body felt distant, unreal, as if fading into an echo. He called it, the scaffolding of thought remained, but the body was an echo. Picture that. Your mind, that stream of ideas, memories, and awareness, the very essence of who you are, still awake, watching, but the body that usually houses it? Gone. Not dead, not alive, just a ghost of itself. In his notes, Hawking spoke of slipping into what he called a silent dimension. This wasn't silence in the way we usually understand it, not just the absence of sound. This silence was alive. It breathed. It pulsed. He described it as a place of geometry that shifted and moved, as if space itself was folding and unfolding like a living being. Shapes that didn't obey the usual laws of physics. A realm where straight lines bent, circles twisted back upon themselves, and time seemed to flow backwards and forwards all at once. In this strange, silent place, Hawking felt something else, something deeply unsettling, yet oddly comforting. He felt watched, not by human eyes, not by some mechanical device or cold machine, but by an intelligence, an awareness that was vast, ancient, and beyond human comprehension. One that watched with patience, as if it had been waiting for him to arrive. For decades, Hawking had been clear in his public statements. He was an atheist, a man of science who rejected the notion of an afterlife or spiritual realm. Consciousness, he argued, was simply the product of neurons firing inside the brain. But privately, In these fleeting moments when his body and mind seemed to part ways, his certainty faltered. What do you do when the ultimate skeptic suddenly experiences something that defies explanation? Something that feels like a brush with the divine, or at least something beyond the physical. What if someone who spent his life debunking religion and the soul actually touched a reality that suggested the opposite? That's the question I want you to hold on to. Because this wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a side effect of medication or the brain's last flickers before death. Hawking made that clear in his notes. He called it a pure awareness, an observer without form or name beyond space and time. Imagine that. Your sense of self stripped away until only pure consciousness remains. No body, no past or future, just being. And yet, this pure awareness still felt connected. It still knew itself, but differently. He described the usual framework of self, the personality, memories, fears, hopes, as dissolving like mist, leaving behind a stillness, a silence that breathed, a threshold, a borderland between this life and what lies beyond. What if this threshold isn't just a poetic metaphor? What if it's an actual doorway? What most people don't realize is that the threshold experience has been reported throughout history by mystics, near-death survivors, and shamans. Yet here it is, documented by one of the greatest scientific minds of our time. A man who looked into black holes, time itself, and the origins of the universe, suddenly telling us about something else. A silent dimension that breathes. A presence that watches. A self beyond the body. He never named that presence. He never tried to put it into words that would make sense to science or religion. Because he knew it was something different altogether. Something new. Something the world wasn't ready to accept. And yet it was there, lurking beneath the surface of the known, waiting for those who dare to look deeper. Now, think about this. If consciousness can survive the collapse of the body, what does that mean for who you are? And what if the silence Hawking spoke of is not emptiness, but a living, breathing realm that shapes reality in ways we cannot yet understand? What if the intelligence he felt watching is a cosmic force, perhaps even the architect of existence itself? You may wonder, how could someone like Hawking, so rational, so grounded in physics, experience something so mysterious? His notes don't answer all the questions. They only deepen the mystery. But they force us to ask, what if science and spirituality are not enemies? What if they are two sides of the same coin? What if the ultimate frontier of knowledge isn't out in space, but inside our very awareness? As you listen, ask yourself, are you ready to reconsider what you think you know about life, death, and consciousness? Are you willing to lift the veil, just a little, and peek into that silent dimension? Because once you glimpse it, you may never see the world the same way again. You wouldn't expect a man like Stephen Hawking, so rooted in mathematics, logic, and the mechanics of the cosmos, to describe something like this. And yet, buried deep within his private notes, amidst rows of equations and theoretical models, was something wholly different. Something that didn't belong in a physics textbook. It began as a pattern. He described it not as numbers or symbols, but as rhythm. As if consciousness itself had a pulse, a frequency not bound to the body, not even bound to time. And what startled him most was that it wasn't random. It moved with structure, design, as if it had been written into the universe. You can picture him, sitting silently in his chair, machine translating his thoughts into words. But inside his mind, something else entirely was unfolding. He described this moment, one that may have taken place during a medical emergency or a deeply altered state, as being filled with light patterns. But not light in the sense we know, not electromagnetic radiation, not photons. This was a light that carried memory. Imagine seeing your own thoughts reflected back to you as luminous sequences, codes, pulses, harmonies, almost like your entire being was being played like an instrument. That's what Hawking tried to reproduce afterward, frantically sketching models, embedding sine waves, referencing Planck scale constants. He believed this phenomenon, this rhythm, might be the key to something he never dared claim publicly, that consciousness might outlive the body. He never used spiritual terms, but his notes veered dangerously close to them. He described the sensation as geometry that shimmered, meaning, perhaps, that form, space, and consciousness were entangled at a level deeper than anyone had guessed. Not merely neurons firing in a brain, but a mathematical hum running beneath all of existence, accessible not through instruments, but through direct perception. And here's where things get even more strange. This code he experienced, it bore resemblance to ideas found far outside the world of theoretical physics. Vedic traditions from India describe consciousness as a vibration of light and sound, stored not in the brain, but in Akasha, an invisible ether that retains all memory. Ancient Egyptian texts speak of soul geometry, sacred patterns the spirit travels through after death, each form unlocking deeper truths. Did Hawking, in his final years, brush up against the same truths, only expressed in the language of math instead of myth? Most people don't realize this. Hawking's public atheism wasn't about certainty. It was about doubt. He didn't believe in a personal God, but he left the door open for something greater, some principle, some order behind the veil. This code of light, this pattern he perceived, shook him, and he began to suspect that what we call mind is not generated by the brain, but translated by it. That your awareness, your identity, your very soul might exist in a field far subtler than anything you can touch. A realm of frequencies. Now, here's the part that raises even more questions. Some of the diagrams Hawking left behind, labeled in his own shorthand, look less like equations and more like mandalas, circular patterns, radial symmetry, interwoven loops. Why? Was he attempting to map something seen in that altered state? A model of the vibrational memory field, as he privately called it? Or was this an unconscious echo of something older, some archetype embedded in the human psyche? Here's what should make you pause. Scientists today are beginning to toy with similar ideas. Quantum information theory suggests that data may be a more fundamental unit than matter. The Planck scale, where time and space dissolve, might hold the scaffolding for everything, even consciousness. And at that level, vibration isn't metaphor, it's law. So ask yourself, what if Hawking wasn't just theorizing? What if, in his most vulnerable moment, he saw it? What if this code of light is real? And if it is, what does that mean for you? Are you just a brain generating awareness like steam from a kettle? Or are you a field of memory and frequency, temporarily wearing a body? What most people don't realize is this. If consciousness is encoded in vibration, then death isn't erasure. It's retuning. Your you-ness doesn't disappear. It shifts octave. And here's the breadcrumb we're not supposed to follow. One note in Hawking's file, half erased, buried beneath layers of formula, mentions a pattern he couldn't explain. It seemed to respond to his mental state. When his thoughts were calm, the pattern stabilized. When his mind raced, it fractured, as if something was aware of him, watching, reacting. Was it simply his brain creating feedback loops? Or was it something else? We don't have the answer. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, you've felt something like it. A strange moment when time bent, when a coincidence spoke too loudly, when a dream revealed something you couldn't have known, when your very awareness seemed to shine beyond your body. Maybe you've touched the edge of this field, and maybe Hawking just went further. By now, you've probably noticed a pattern. The deeper we go into Hawking's private discoveries, the more we realize how little we actually knew about the man behind the theories. But this next piece, buried in a bundle of locked correspondence, is where the illusion truly begins to crack. After Hawking's death, his longtime research assistant was tasked with organizing the massive troves of academic notes, digital files, and personal letters stored in encrypted formats. Among them, tucked between technical white papers and decades-old conference materials, was a letter addressed to a fellow physicist, someone you've probably never heard of. Not a Nobel laureate, not a media personality. Just a quiet theoretical physicist whose expertise straddled both quantum mechanics and spiritual metaphysics. The letter was never published. It never appeared in any collected works. In fact, sources close to the estate say it was nearly deleted. And when you read it, you begin to understand why. In this letter, Hawking doesn't sound like the icon we were trained to admire. The stern rationalist who dismissed God as an unnecessary variable. No, here, he sounds like a man who has seen something he couldn't explain within the usual boundaries of scientific speech, something that demanded metaphor. He starts by exploring black holes, not as mere astrophysical phenomena, but as metaphors for consciousness. He proposes a wild but precise idea that the human mind might be subject to the same mechanics as collapsing stars, that when the body dies, the consciousness doesn't vanish. It compresses, not into nothing, but into something beyond the veil, like information being drawn into a singularity. And just like Hawking radiation slowly leaks from a black hole over time, what if consciousness also leaks across the threshold? He asked, does death compress us, only to re-emit us across the event horizon of another world? That's not just poetic, that's cosmological. He toyed with the idea that death isn't annihilation, it's transition, a transfer of awareness that resembles the mathematical laws he had spent a lifetime decoding. A kind of cosmic recycling, one intelligence folding into another realm, perhaps to continue existing in a form we can't yet measure. Not lost, just reframed. The most startling part wasn't the content. It was the fact that Hawking wrote this without irony, without mockery, and with the deliberate caution of someone testing the boundaries of what he was allowed to think out loud. The letter ends abruptly. It offers no conclusion, no firm theory. Just more questions. But they're not casual questions. They carry the weight of someone who knew the stakes of such speculation. Hawking had spent decades reinforcing the wall between science and what many considered pseudoscience. This letter cracks that wall. So why have you never heard of it? because it was quietly pulled, not by accident, not by some clerical oversight. According to insiders at the Cambridge Digital Archive, the letter was marked philosophically inappropriate for academic preservation, which is a bureaucratic way of saying this makes us uncomfortable. And discomfort, especially when it challenges institutional boundaries, is always the first step toward suppression. It's important to understand. Hawking was more than a celebrity scientist. He was a symbol of rationalism, of human intellect untainted by mysticism. If the public learned that this same symbol had dared to ask if the soul might survive death, as light survives a prism, what then? Would we have listened more closely to what science was trying to whisper beneath its equations? Or would we have dismissed him as a man lost to illness, to hallucination, to desperation? Either way, that letter posed a threat, not to science but to the narrative around science. The neat little story we tell ourselves that separates logic from mystery, data from wonder. Hawking, in that one moment, shattered the divide. Now, ask yourself, why do certain truths feel so dangerous? Why are questions about the soul, or life after death, still treated like contamination in a laboratory of facts? You live in a world that filters knowledge, that labels some discoveries as objective and others as delusional, even when they're from the same mind, the same pen, the same consciousness. What if this letter had been released in his lifetime? What if it's not the only one? There are rumors, some from those close to the estate, that other notes exist. Sketches, diagrams, equations, half-formed thoughts. Hawking may have considered too risky to finish. Thoughts not meant for textbooks, but for seekers. Breadcrumbs in a much larger puzzle. The kind that can only be assembled by those willing to question both religion and science. Not out of rebellion, but out of reverence for something deeper. Something waiting just beyond the event horizon of human understanding. And the question that still lingers like a hum beneath everything he left behind is this: what else was removed? Imagine Stephen Hawking, the world's foremost physicist, a man of unwavering logic and rigorous science, coming face to face with something that transcends everything he devoted his life to studying. A reality beyond death. A realm where consciousness exists apart from the body. How does that change everything you thought you knew about life? We've all been taught that we are biology, just flesh, blood, neurons firing, and nothing more. But what if that's only part of the story? What if the essence of who you are, the core of your identity, does not vanish when the body dies? Imagine that your consciousness, your very mind, is not confined to your physical brain. What if it is a force, a presence that travels beyond time and space, echoing across the universe in ways science has only begun to hint at? Stephen Hawking's experience forces us to ask, are we truly just collections of atoms arranged by chance, or is there a deeper underlying intelligence animating us? What if consciousness is the one constant, something that never fades, never truly dies, but folds and unfolds like a cosmic rhythm? Picture time folding in on itself, like a delicate origami where past, present, and future blend. The mind leaves subtle, invisible fingerprints on the cosmos, a signature of its passage across the vastness of existence. This idea challenges everything we think we know about identity. Who are you when your thoughts collapse? What remains of you when the body is gone? Is it memory? Is it energy? Or is it something else? Something beyond the grasp of science and language? Stephen Hawking's notes hinted that consciousness might be stored not in flesh, but in frequency, patterns of light, vibrations at the smallest scales, carrying memory and experience beyond the physical. If that's true, then the boundaries between science and spirituality begin to blur. We start to glimpse a universe where physics and mysticism are not enemies, but two sides of the same coin. What ancient traditions called the soul or spirit might be the very same thing that modern physics describes as quantum information or cosmic energy. This is not fantasy. This is a radical rethinking of existence, where death is not a final curtain but a doorway. Ask yourself, what if death is not the end but a transition? What if, at the moment our thoughts cease, something else begins? Something that takes the imprint of your consciousness and re-emits it across dimensions, across realities you cannot yet imagine. Hawking's suppressed letter raised this question, whether black holes could serve as metaphors or even literal gateways, where the self compresses and then emerges anew elsewhere. This challenges your entire understanding of fate. If consciousness transcends biology and space, what does that say about free will, about destiny? Could the choices you make now ripple far beyond your physical life, shaping realities unseen? What legacy do you leave behind? Not just in memories or actions, but in the very fabric of existence. You've been living with a veil over your eyes, shaped by centuries of materialist thinking. But what if that veil is lifting? What if the awakening Hawking glimpsed? The silent dimension he described, the intelligence watching him from beyond, wasn't just his alone? What if it is an invitation for you, right now, to open your mind to a larger reality? This is more than philosophy. It's a call to awaken, to question what you think you know about life and death, about identity and consciousness. Because if Hawking's experience holds truth, then your inner world, the world of your thoughts, dreams, and awareness, is connected to something eternal and vast. Are you listening? Are you ready to see beyond the ordinary? To step into the mystery where science meets soul? Because this knowledge will change you. It will shift how you live, how you love, how you face the unknown. You will never be the same once you accept that the mind is not confined to the body, that death is not the end, and that you carry a spark of the cosmos within you. So ask yourself, what do you carry past the collapse of thought? What if consciousness is the thread that weaves through every life, every universe, every moment in time? What if you are part of a vast, ongoing story, one where science, spirituality, and human experience are intertwined in ways we are only beginning to understand? This is your invitation to reconsider, to explore the depths of your own existence and question the limits set by conventional knowledge. Because the truth hidden in Hawking's last revelations may just be the key to unlocking a new understanding of life itself. What will you do with that knowledge? Will you embrace the mystery or turn away? Will you seek connection beyond the physical, beyond time? The choice is yours. But remember, once the veil is lifted, there's no going back to seeing the world as just matter and chance. There is only the vast, intricate dance of consciousness, time, and the cosmos, waiting for you to step through.